Evil Lloyd, or Enemy Lloyd, is a concept from the 4th season of Dragon's Rising that I honestly didn't know how to handle. We of course had implication that we were going to be getting some evil counterpart when it came to Lloyd, and the trailer basically confirmed that to us as well. But the thing is that as I was speculating on how they were going to utilize him, I honestly was becoming quite skeptical. But now we finally have the season in front of us and we finally got to see what this character actually entailed. I honestly couldn't have been any more happy when it does come to Evil Lloyd. I think he was a much needed and much cherished addition when it comes to season 4 part 1. And honestly, the expectation that I saw a lot of people hope for compared to what we got, I do think is an interesting thing. And that is going to be what we cover today. Compare what people expected when it came to Evil Lloyd compared to what we actually got. And actually just talk about this concept in general, because there are so many little details and so many little aspects to him that I really do think deserve more attention, because I truly think what they have crafted with Evil Lloyd is nothing short of brilliant. So let me not waste any more of your time and let's talk about Evil Lloyd. One thing I do want to immediately bring up when it does come to Evil Lloyd is actually his design. One thing that I was seeing a lot of people expect was actually the CMF version of Lloyd as Evil Lloyd, but the thing is that this one is just actually reusing the spectral design, apart from the shoulder armor. But the thing is that I really like this look. That darker green on the suit is amazing looking, and it definitely does work. I've always said I love when Lloyd adopts a darker green aesthetic, and this is honestly just kind of proof. If anything, I really want the version of Lloyd's hair with that darker headband, because it looks nothing short of glorious. But in terms of design, even though it's by all account nothing special, I just really like what they did here. But beside the design of it, the first thing that we ever actually saw in terms of an Evil Lloyd was his name mentioned in a leak. The thing is that one of the more common leaks that we see throughout Dragon's Rising is actually just a leaked list of the lines that everyone has within the season, and an Enemy Lloyd was cited. So people were immediately going to speculate on what was actually going on here. Of course, we also saw Young Lloyd and Teen Lloyd, but people were noting the fact that these variants of Lloyds were very much existing and very much could have had some sort of impact on the story. But that Evil Lloyd was definitely an anomaly here. The thing is that an Evil Lloyd is something that we've only actually seen once before when it does come to Ninjago, and of course that is Oni Lloyd. Crystallized has been a very contentious season, and Dragon's Rising has definitely fixed things from Crystallized, so people were starting to wonder if Oni Lloyd was going to have a return. It would make sense considering the fact that Season 3 did bring up the Oni and definitely did have links back to the Oni, so it did feel like they were setting up the building blocks to reintroduce the Oni in a much wider scale when it does come to Dragon's Rising. So having Lloyd be the bridge definitely could have made a lot of sense. But the thing is that these were basically just bits of speculation. There was no basis for it whatsoever, and people were just kind of hoping that we were gonna get Oni Lloyd again, because not only was he in Crystallized and honestly not really the best, the thing is that he also had very limited screen time. We barely actually got to see any form of Oni Lloyd, and we barely got to see what he was truly capable of. So this was just opening the door to so much potential on the future of Lloyd, and more specifically his dark side, something that has often been cited and utilized but never really actualized in any true capacity. So people were assuming that we were going to see an Oni version of Lloyd fight off against the good Lloyd, and that is not bad whatsoever. It definitely would have made for something extremely interesting. But again, just no one really knew if this was going to be what happened. It wasn't until the trailer for Season 4 dropped and people noted the fact that in the reflection of one of the shots of Lloyd, you could actually see Evil Lloyd. I didn't even notice this upon first watch, and it was you guys that actually pointed it out to me. So it seemed to be that people actually had more of an indication on what Lloyd was truly going to be in this evil form, and it didn't seem to immediately be an Oni version of Lloyd. And I think that had a lot of people immediately wondering what was going to be the case, because if it was just another version of Lloyd, what was it actually going to be in terms of his evil counterpart? But the season finally released, and we finally got the answer to that question, and honestly, I think what we actually got here was a version of Lloyd that was just simply much better than what an Oni Lloyd could have been. The thing about Oni Lloyd is the fact that whilst it is inherently cool, it's just essentially a form that's built on anger. Oni form, as we've seen it so far, has never really been anything beyond that. Garmadon is still Garmadon when he is in that form. Of course, it has been noted that if Lloyd stayed in the Oni form for any longer longer than he did, he would have become evil, but we don't necessarily know what that actually entails. Would it be the version of Lloyd that we saw in Dragon's Rising? We don't really know. And I do think that is the ultimate question. What actually is Only Lloyd? And I feel like they would have had to have done a lot of defining to actually make it work within Dragon's Rising. But to now push what the expectation of evil Lloyd was going to be aside, let's now actually look what we truly actually got. We got a version of Lloyd that acknowledges Lloyd's failures, and actually uses them as a reason on why Lloyd simply isn't enough. Evil Lloyd tells Lloyd about how he's his own enemy, he's a poor leader, and he just blames others for his failures, and he never actually takes responsibility for the issues that he has caused over the course of the series. Evil Lloyd mentions the fact that he never prioritized trying to rescue Aaron's parents and let that fall to the side just simply because he didn't want to, and he also failed to find Jay, which resulted in Jay actually shattering his goodness, and even says that Master Wu is alive but won't come back because he just simply acknowledges how much of a failure his nephew truly is. This version of Lloyd does not hold punches in terms of the people that matter the most to Lloyd. This version of Lloyd knows exactly where to hit and knows exactly where it's going to hurt. He also understood exactly what external factors he should use to also torment Lloyd, and knew exactly how to get Lloyd basically uneasy and off of his game. One thing that he notes is also the Source Dragons. He talks about how Lloyd even made them angry, and how he will never be able to go back, and he will always have to live with this burden of doing essentially everything that is wrong. It is really fascinating to see how eager evil Lloyd is, basically just tell Lloyd about how bad he is as a human being. This is a version of Lloyd that really doesn't know any form of goodness whatsoever, and if funnily enough does remind you a lot of someone else when it does come to Ninjago. And that is none other than the Jade Princess herself, Harumi. Evil Lloyd shares so many resemblances when it does come to Harumi, of course prior to the moment where she actually becomes good and crystallized. Evil Lloyd is a constant reminder to Lloyd about past mistakes, past errors, and ultimately utilizes them against him to basically make him uneasy off of his feet, like I said. Use it to a combat advantage, as we see in the fight between Lloyd and also Evil Lloyd. And not only that, we also get to see depictions of Evil Lloyd manipulating Lloyd, basically telling him to give up, he's not enough, he will never pass a trial, he'll never be worthy of the mantle he's put on himself. He constantly manipulates Lloyd essentially into giving up, also in similar vein to what Harumi tried. Evil Lloyd also shares a lot of the same mannerisms that Harumi did. Very taunting, very methodical in how they actually behave. Evil Lloyd is just constantly smiling like Harumi did, relaying information that of course he deems to be the truth, and does it in this sarcastic and vain way. And even in the moments then when Lloyd attempts to attack him, you can just see him go almost dead-eyed and just attack back and always succeed. Every single attack that Evil Lloyd does is precise and intentional. It is very reminiscent of Harumi, and honestly I think it's even better because of it. And all of this is wrapped together in a very nice little bow, because above all of this, and the most direct comparison between the two, is the fact that Evil Lloyd, very subtly in the background, has the Harumi soundtrack. It is, in my opinion, the most silver bullet when it does come to Harumi and Evil Lloyd's link. The fact that they both share that same music, I think, is the perfect demonstration on what the intention was when it does come to Evil Lloyd. Directly tying this evil variant of himself to basically his former love interest and the biggest villain that Lloyd ever faced is the most intentional move, and honestly, in a lot of ways, perfect. I think it demonstrates more than just the resemblances between the two. Evil Lloyd, in my opinion, also resembles what Harumi ultimately wanted for Lloyd. And you could link that in a way, I guess, to Only Lloyd, but also not. But regardless of that link, the fact is that this is a version of Lloyd that the old Harumi would have absolutely adored, because this is a version that is basically the exact same. And honestly, I do think it would have been very interesting to see how this version of Lloyd would have reacted. The revelation of the connection between Evil Lloyd and Harumi just makes me shocked that Harumi wasn't directly mentioned within the fight itself. Evil Lloyd does a lot of mentioning in terms of Lloyd's failures, and Harumi is most definitely one of them. I am very shocked that they didn't take the opportunity to actually make the resemblance more finite, actually make it more in your face, and actually pull that direct link. I'm honestly thinking they didn't because of Crystallized, so that kind of does make sense, but still regardless, you would think that that would have been brought up during the fight. But it just doesn't take away from the fact that this version of Lloyd is potentially one of the most interesting versions of them than we've ever actually seen. I want to make at least another video talking about him, more specifically the fight between the two, because I do want to analyze that more in depth. But beyond all that, I do think this version of Lloyd completely exceeded my expectation, and in my opinion is 10 times better than the concept we could have had in terms of an Oni Lloyd. I think making this version of him more of a darker reflection of himself instead of basically just a whole nother version of him honestly is a stroke of genius, and how they executed it is nothing short of perfect. Unfortunately though, it does seem to be that we may never see this version of Lloyd again. It doesn't seem to have any sort of way to come back into the story because of the nature. Lloyd, by all account, will never have to go back into the ritual because it's already been complete. So Evil Lloyd is just going to be essentially a dark fragment of Lloyd's mind. If there was a way to bring him back, that would be interesting, but I honestly hope that they don't. I'm actually really hopeful that this version will remain as this very short-lived and fantastic character that we can often just cite back as being a very interesting aspect of Lloyd's personality. But hey, if they bring him back and he's anywhere near as good as he was here, I definitely would not be upset. But I do think on an overall, Evil Lloyd will go down as one of the better parts of Dragon's Rising Season 4. I think this is a fantastic concept that they absolutely nailed, and honestly, I don't think there are any ways you really could have made it better. Everything down to the design details I think were carefully thought out and very well executed. Honestly, the main thing for me is that we get a minifigure of it one day, because I really do like this variant of him, and I definitely would want to represent it in my collection because it's something that I truly think is that fascinating. But as a character, I think he did more than what I expected, and I am extremely glad with what we got with him. But what is your opinion on Evil Lloyd? Do you like him or do you not? Did you see the Harumi links, or is it something that has only been pointed out to you now? I'm very curious to know what you think of this character, because I'm essentially wondering if I like him a whole lot more than most people. Because I honestly don't have a flaw with him. I really don't have any sort of negativity about him, which is ironic because he's Evil Lloyd. But beside all of that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people, and if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Each of you, your support means the absolute world to me, and I couldn't be any more thankful. But like I said, that is about it for today, and take care. Okay,